Hi there, I'm Tom Beebekauser, the owner of Wetland Restoration and Training. Today I'm going to show you how to dig deep test holes to help you in designing a wetland restoration project. Digging deep test holes will give you valuable information on groundwater and soil texture by layer, and it's a critical step when designing a large wetland project. Let's get started. I recommend digging deep test holes with an excavator if you're planning to build a wetland that's over 1/2 acre in size. The excavator can dig deeper and faster than what you can do by hand, and you'll be able to see and measure the thickness of each soil layer and the groundwater elevation on the site. The money you spend on digging a deep test hole is well worth it. I recommend going online and requesting a check for buried utilities before you dig any deep test holes. This service is free. A technician will come out and mark the location of buried electric, gas, and fiber optic lines on the property, and they'll do this within 3 days of your request. Mark the perimeter of the wetland you would like to build in advance of digging deep test holes. This way you'll know where to place the holes that you want to dig. Don't dig the deep test hole where there's water standing on the surface. The water will pour into the hole and will give you a false reading of whether or not groundwater is present. Bring a spray bottle of water with you and a towel for cleaning your hands. We'll use the water to figure out soil texture and clay content. You'll need a 100-foot tape measure to measure the thickness of each soil layer and the depth of the test hole. You'll also need a small tape measure to measure the length of the soil ribbons that you form. I recommend recording your findings in a notebook or on this wetland design form. We plan on digging a deep test hole on the Roundhill farm near Goshen, Kentucky. This will help us to design a wetland project. This hole will be dug near the center of the wetland we would like to build. I've asked John Utterback, the excavator operator, to place layers of soil that look and feel different in separate piles so we can measure these without going down into the hole. John removes vegetation and places topsoil on one side of the hole. The light brown colored soil is placed on the other side of the hole. Notice the large clumps of soil that fall out of the bucket. These clumps show that the soil is high in clay. I stand in front of the excavator and on the opposite side where the soil is being piled to look for changes in soil color and texture and to see if water is entering the hole. I motioned to the operator to stop because I could see and hear the bucket hitting rocks in the hole. The rocky layer is gray in color and there's black patches. I return and use the tape measure to measure the distance from the surface down to the rocky gray and black layer. The soil John is bringing up below the gray and black layer is redder in color. He places the soil on the side of the pile that is light brown in color. I return and look down into the hole and see that the red-colored soil has fewer clumps. This lack of clumps shows that the soil is lower in clay content. You can now see a thick layer of light brown soil overlaying gray and black colored soil. The gray and black soil is on top of the red colored soil. The various layers of soil are now visible in the hole. The light brown colored soil is high in clay. The gray and black soil is rocky, and the red colored soil is high in sand, but has a little bit of clay. John stops the excavator so I could take measurements and use the ribbon test to measure clay content in the soil. John and I point to changes in soil texture that we can see in the hole. John and I measure the thickness of the topsoil, the light brown colored layer of clay, and where the top of the gray and red colored rocky sand layer begins. I now measure the clay content in each layer by using the ribbon test. Looking down in the hole, we can see that water is flowing in the layer of gray and black colored soil. You can see water flowing out of the gray and black layer down over the face of the red layer. We decided to use the compacted clay liner technique to build a wetland on the site. This is because there was a 4-foot layer of clay over mixed rocky and sandy soil. The rocky and sandy soil is on top of limestone bedrock. We know from experience that limestone bedrock is permeable and does not make a good foundation for a groundwater dam. John now uses the excavator to fill in the deep test hole with mineral soil. He compacts the mineral soil by driving over it with the excavator. The saved topsoil is spread over the mineral soil. We've moved to a different site on the Roundhill farm. This site is on higher ground and we're going to dig a deep test hole to help us design the wetland. John is removing the vegetation and he places the topsoil on one side of the hole. The dark brown colored soil is placed on the other side of the hole. Notice the large clumps of soil that have fallen out of the bucket? These clumps show us that the soil is high in clay. John stops digging so that we can grab some soil samples, add water to the soil, and make ribbons and find out what is the clay content of the soil by layer. I now use the 100-foot long measuring tape to measure the thickness of each soil layer. We start by measuring the thickness of the topsoil layer. Next, I move on and I measure the thickness of the layer of clay loam. And finally, I measure the depth of the hole that we dug. We decided to use the surface water technique to build the wetland. This is because the clay extended all the way down into the ground as far as we could dig using the excavator. We were interested in building large and deep water wetlands on the Wine Cup and Gamble Ranch in Nevada, and we wanted to build these to provide opportunities for fishing as well as for wildlife viewing. We used an excavator to dig deep test holes in the area where the construction of wetlands was planned. The organic layer on the surface is about 22 inches thick in this test hole. We found clay beneath this organic layer. This photo shows a close-up view of the clay beneath the topsoil layer. At this depth, it looked like we could use the surface water technique to build the wetland. We uncovered gravel beneath the clay. The clay layer was 40 inches thick. The gravel was saturated and the banks were caving in. We dug holes as deep as 16 feet deep, but we could not reach the bedrock. Groundwater quickly filled the hole from the gravel layer. The groundwater stabilized within 24 inches of the surface. We used the groundwater technique to build the wetlands because it was not possible to dig deep enough to an impermeable layer to build a groundwater dam. And the clay layer was too thin and too wet to build a wetland using the compacted clay liner technique. I think you'll agree that the wetlands turned out very well. The Cane Creek Wildlife Management Area is part of the Patoka River National Wildlife Refuge. It's near the Wabash River in Indiana. Like every other national wildlife refuge, it has large impoundments that don't hold water. Wells with large pumps were installed at the Cane Ridge Wildlife Management Area to fill the impoundments with water. The impoundments at Cane Creek cannot be filled with water even when the large pumps are operated day and night. We used a backhoe to dig deep test holes in the impoundments. There was a thick layer of topsoil in the impoundment basins. The topsoil was high in organic material and it was permeable. The topsoil layer continued under the dams that had been constructed to form the impoundments. Beneath the topsoil was silt clay texture soil. It was possible to make a long and thin ribbon from the clay. This showed us that the impoundments should be holding water. However, sand was uncovered beneath the layer of clay. The sand was removed from the hole. The sand was saturated with water. Groundwater quickly began filling the test holes. The groundwater was moving in the sand beneath the clay. This bucket holds sand removed from 7 feet below the surface of the ground. The gray color shows that the sand is saturated all year. The sand extended into the ground as deep as we could reach with the bucket on the backhoe. This was 13 feet below the surface. Water filled the test holes and rose to within 17 inches of the surface. This photo shows the entrance to a crayfish burrow. There were thousands of crayfish burrows in the impoundments. See the sand surrounding the hole? The crayfish brought the sand to the surface when they were cleaning out their burrows. The burrows penetrated the silt clay near the surface and extended down into the sand where the groundwater was found. Deep ditches had been dug near the impoundment dams. The bottom of these ditches intercepted the sand under the impoundments. Water that was pumped into the impoundments was flowing into the crayfish burrows and then down into the sand layer, and then it was flowing under the dams into the ditches. This photo shows that the wetlands should have been built using the groundwater technique. This is because the only water found in the impoundments was in the deep borrow pits where clay had been removed to build the high dams. The deep test holes showed that the wetlands may be restored within the failed impoundments by excavating basins of various shapes, sizes, and depths. The basins would need to be dug down into the sand beneath the clay. The dams that were built at great expense were serving no purpose as they were built on a permeable foundation. I've been building wetlands to provide breeding habitat for the federally threatened California red-legged frog. This is being done on the Tahoe National Forest in California. The National Forest System land is on mountains where clay and groundwater are not available for building wetlands. It's very difficult to find an area on the Tahoe National Forest that is flat enough to build a wetland that is not already a cultural resource site where soil disturbance is not allowed. Most of the level areas near Michigan Bluff on the Tahoe National Forest where we wanted to build wetlands were used for gold mining in the 1850s. These level areas are protected under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. It is necessary to dig deep test holes to determine if there's enough soil to build wetlands using aquatic-safe liners because of the many boulders and the bedrock that are present near the surface. Here the excavator operator, Don Smith, is digging a deep hole to see if it's possible to break through the rock so that a wetland may be built on the site using an aquatic-safe liner. Here we're building a wetland where it's possible to remove the boulders using a large excavator. The deep test hole showed us that the rock that we encountered while digging a test hole by hand was really large scattered boulders that could be removed and was not bedrock. This deep test hole uncovered a patch of clay that was mixed with sandy loam and rock. A liner would be needed to build a wetland on this site. Here a soil scientist is examining a deep test hole that we dug. We were excited when clay was uncovered in this test hole. We were thinking that we could build a wetland using the surface water technique. However, close examination showed us that the clay was oriented in vertical columns, not in horizontal layers. This meant that we would have to use an aquatic-safe liner to build a wetland. This drawing shows how a wetland can be built using an aquatic-safe liner. These photos show some of the wetlands we have built on the Tahoe National Forest using aquatic-safe liners that are providing habitat for the California red-legged frog. It is always worthwhile digging deep test holes when designing a wetland restoration project. This is Tom Biebighauser with Wetland Restoration and Training. I encourage you to like this video, to share it with others, to subscribe, and please visit the website for Wetland Restoration and Training. We're going to learn so much more about wetlands and how they can be restored. Thank you.